Can you tell us a bit more about the lunch?
What I can tell you is that I just can't fathom what has happened.
All we're seeing here is a lot more limbic system of our brain defaulting to concealment. She reverts directly back to the same rehearsed lines that look like they were practiced in a mirror almost. And the vocal lilting here you're hearing is forced lilting, this kind of vocal fluctuation. When in a person who's really crying, it would be a physiological response, an automatic physiological response, because the person needs to breathe. So there's lung fluctuations that are going on when someone's crying. She's heard this sound from people crying before and assumes, this is probably a subconscious process, assumes that the sound alone is what's required to make people think you're crying. In reality, you'll see physiological evidence that someone's crying with heaving and breathing irregularly. And when you hear this sound, that's gonna be apparent in someone who's crying. And it would be so obvious that you could see it at about 100 meters away, since we're in Australia here. A non-guilty person is going to be open to talk about the food. It would be the center of the discussion. They would talk openly about their feelings of guilt or shame, even more openly about how they feel about potentially causing this. Would be a person who didn't plan it. Like, I feel so awful. I hope it wasn't the food. It would be a center point of the discussion. So, like I say in many of our videos, every time you're in doubt, just go back and look for what's being hidden, concealed, or not talked about. And you'll see something, you'll see a story there that everybody's got to tell.
Can you tell us a bit more about the lunch?
One more time, she's asked about the lunch, and she goes right back into chaff and redirect. She gets as far away from that as she possibly can. She goes straight to not understanding what's happening.
Can't fathom what has happened. I just can't fathom what has happened.
And then she says, all I can tell you is...
What I can tell you.
Because that's probably all she can tell him, because she can't tell him much more. There's not much more to tell. If she says much more, she may tell on herself by accident. That's my opinion anyway. Then she stands there like an actor in a horrible, horrible play from like the fourth grade or something. It's just so bad. I don't know who she's looking at or where she's looking or anything. Her eyes are closed a lot. The whole thing is just a really bad show. And you're right. I think it's a rehearsed answer. I think she was ready. And her, I don't think she's the smartest person in the world. I have no idea, but I think she's rehearsed this answer in her own way up in her head, and she's delivering it. It's not going the way she thought it would go. I think she thought when someone asked her, I don't think she expected this, but I think she thought when she was asked the questions about this, she'd be able just to deliver with this fake cry, and it would sell and they would buy it. That's how it looks to me. So she just keeps distancing with that I'm devastated thing. And I think she just looks like a little kid who's been busted for doing something she shouldn't have done. And it really doesn't bother her, but she's faking her way through it. That's what it looks like to me.
Look, just as I studied molecular gastronomy at Harvard, let's talk about beef Wellington, okay? And it is a job to put beef Wellington together. So, Chase, to your point of if somebody says, hey, tell us about dinner, if you made beef Wellington and you are innocent, you're going to go, I made beef Wellington. That's how much I love these people, because that's got to be minimum a whole day, probably 2 days of preparation, which means you can plan, you can prepare, and you're going to take care of the ingredient throughout that, because this is a real situation you've got yourself into. You're probably not going to make one, you're probably going to make 2 of these things because you've got a lot of people around and people are going to want more of that. So that she avoids talking about the lunch completely, that is totally off base for somebody who loves to cook, which clearly she does, because you only make beef Wellington if you love doing that and you love entertaining. So that's why for me that she avoids that is totally off kilter.
How long does it take, Mark? How long does it take to make that for real, like in hours wise?
Well, I mean, in terms of, like, you got to let it rest in the fridge at various different stages to get it really nice and tight. Yeah, you've got to, if you're going to do it, you're going to sous vide the meat, because you're looking for exactly the right Brownian motion through the meat. By the way, that equation for the Brownian motion is an Einstein equation. So if you're ever thinking, what did Einstein ever do for me? Well, he made it possible for us to be able to calculate exactly how long it will take and exactly what heat will be required to perfectly cook your steak or that medallion of beef inside the beef Wellington. So it's a massive amount of time.
I pray that he pulls through.
She gets into praying. I pray. So, some other higher entity comes into it. There is no higher entity, as far as I'm concerned, than the beef Wellington. That's a miracle, the beef Wellington.
Because my children love him.
And then my children love him. So again, bringing in the children rather than saying I love him, my children love him. It's all off base for me.
Let me give her a benefit of a doubt on one thing. Look, if tomorrow you made beef Wellington and you foraged mushrooms and you made a mistake and you killed your family, you would also still feel guilt and all the same things we're talking about. So let's give her a benefit of a doubt there. What we can see, however, is that we look for red flags. One is not a big deal, but there's no attempt to stop crying. There's no grief or no concern in the brow. There's no sorrow at the brow. If you listen, what I can tell you, that starts off aggressive in tone. And then she changes gears to I can't fathom.
I just can't fathom what has happened.
That feels awkward. That feels like she wanted to say something else and thought it. And then she does a sudden eye grab and tear check. Her blink rate goes through the roof. And we're back to that fractured voice like a little kid.
That Ian and Heather have lost their lives. And Gail has lost her life. And Donna's still in hospital.
Chase, you were talking about the same thing I was talking about, the fractured breathing, followed by the if you're trying to control, then it comes in waves. None of that's there. The same way this little kid was crying. Even at the end, her tone flattens out as she says, because, and she doesn't just say because my children, she again hesitates, says because my bit, and then she changes directions.
Because my children love him.
I want to know what those words meant. Maybe it is that she accidentally did this so she would have some of these same emotions. We can't tell that. We can't tell intent. Did she go out of her way to do this? I did read, however, there was a dehydrator for mushrooms that she ended up throwing away after this. That starts to look suspicious when put with all these red flags.
Can you tell us a bit more about the lunch?
What I can tell you is that I just can't fathom what has happened. I just can't fathom what has happened. That Ian and Heather have lost their lives, and Gail has lost her life, and Donna's still in hospital, and I pray that he pulls through, because my children love him.
If you like this video, get the full body language breakdown and analysis on our main channel by clicking this video right here.